Welcome back to another video part of the Django Channels series. In this one we're continuing off of the last one where we added authentication and converted these contacts into these list items that we could navigate to different chats. Well, in this one we're going to rebuild the backend a little bit so that we can start controlling the chats, the messages, and the actual contacts themselves, the users. And we're going to do this with an API as well. So we're going to build an API that allows the user to get all their contacts in the front end and actually navigate to the chats that they belong to according to their contacts. So if you'd like to follow along, you can go to our GitHub account, to the Just Chat repository, and you can clone or download this repository and then use the commits to reset back to whichever part of the tutorial you're joining from. So right now the latest one is this chat navigating message timestamp and auto scrolling. If you click on that commit, then you can use this commit hash by saying git reset -- hard, and then this commit hash will take you back to the code at this point that we're starting with right now. So once you've got everything in VS Code, you've got your servers running for the local host and for the front end, and you're good to go, then let's get started. So we're going to get started in the source folder and to the chat app here, and then to the models.py file. And this is where we already had our first message model, but we're going to configure this a little bit now. And what we're going to do is we're going to build three models. The contact, which is basically going to be like our user model, the message, and then the chat. So the logic here is that the chat will hold the participants of the chat, and it will hold all the messages associated with that chat. Then the message will kind of stay the same. We're just going to rename the author to be the contact and then link this message to the actual contact. And the contact is just a way of keeping track of the user and their friends, so who they actually have as contacts in their contact book, for example. So the first one we'll start with is the contact model. So we'll say this comes from models.model, and we're just going to specify the user, and we'll specify the friends as well. And the first one is going to be a foreign key, which we'll specify on the user, and we'll say the related name is the user's friends, and we'll specify on delete as models.cascade. And then for the friends, this is going to be a many-to-many field, which will be off of self, meaning a many-to-many field of the contact. And then we'll just set blank equal to true because you might not have any friends. And then we'll just define the string method here to just say that it returns self.username. Then we already have this message model. All I'm going to do now is just rename author to be contact so that we are more consistent. So we'll say the contact is a foreign key off of the contact model. The related name I'm going to say are the messages, and then the rest there can stay the same, except now the author doesn't exist, so we say self.contact.user.username because the contact would be this model up here, so we access the user off of the contact. And we're going to get rid of this last 10 messages as well and put it rather on the new class, which will be the chat, and this comes from models.model as well. And here we'll specify the participants, which is just going to be a many-to-many field of contacts, so whoever can join this chat. And we'll specify the related name as the chats. So basically, if I want to access a specific user's chats that they're a participant in, then I just have to say user dot or contact rather dot chats, and that will give me their chats. And then we'll just say the messages are a many-to-many field of message, and again we specify blank as true because there might not be any messages. Then we've got this last 10 messages, which I'm just going to put self in there, and here we're just going to return self.object. So basically return the messages for this specific chat, not just all the messages, but now this specific chat. And instead of it being objects, we say self.messages.objects chat.orderby negative timestamp. And then lastly, we'll add a string method here. So we'll say define string of self, and we'll just say return this with some formatting to return the primary key of the chat. And there we go. So those are our new models that we're going to use. And now what we want to do is basically return the messages for the chat corresponding to the chat that the user is actually connected to. And so let's get started with actually bringing the list of chats through an API to the front end so that the user can actually see the chats that they belong to. And so now I've just deleted the migrations and the database itself so that we can get this from a clean database. So I'm just going to make those migrations and then migrate it all again. Right, so now I've deleted the database and started that all again with a fresh database. I've got my super user done. And if we come into the chats here and we click add chat, we could add a participant, and this is a contact model. So I'm going to add one for admin and we'll click save, and we'll actually add another one here for Matt and save. And those two are now participants of the chat, so we can click save just so that we have one entry in our database when we start working with the API. And we can do that right now. So inside our chat app, I'm just going to create the API folder and we'll initialize it with our init.py file. And we can close that as well. Now inside API, I'm going to add our serializers.py, and we're going to add our urls.py and our views.py. Now inside the URLs of the actual chat app, I'm going to actually get rid of these because we don't use them anymore, which means we'll get rid of the view there as well. And we'll also go to the views, and I'm going to remove all of that as well. So we know that we don't need to work out of that. But I'm also going to remove the templates because we aren't actually using them anymore. And the static folder I'm going to remove as well. And so now we can focus on our serializer, the URLs, let me just rename that, and the views. Now we already have a series on the Django REST framework, which I'll link here for you to see. So if you want to learn more about that, then you can check out that series. But the basic concept is that a serializer takes a model or a query set and then turns it into a JSON response. So we need to create a serializer for the model, which in this case will be our chats that we'll start off with, and we'll serialize the chats and send that data through onto the front end. So for example, this serializer is what we'll use for our chat. So we import our model, the chat model, from our models, and then our serializer extends from the default REST framework serializer, and this is the model serializer. Then here we just specify the class meta to specify the model that we're actually working with, and then you have to specify either the fields or the fields to exclude, which in this case I'm just specifying as all the fields, although we most likely will change that eventually. Then here in the views, so these are the basic views that we're using to handle our API, and this is just coming from our REST framework generics. So the list view, retrieve, create, destroy, and update view. So those basic CRUD views, and they're all the same thing. It's just specifying the query set, the serializer class, the permission class. So it's all the same thing. And you can see how we implemented this in the Django React series as well. And so lastly, we just want to hook up this to our URLs, which is very simple to do. We just import our views, which is coming from this file, and specify the paths to handle those views, and just specify .asView because they are class-based views. So now we just have to hook up the API URLs to our project URLs. So let's go into the just chat URLs, and this is now not going to include chat.urls, but it's rather going to be chat.api.urls, so that we specifically go into chat API URLs there. So now we can close that, and if we check the server, it seems like it is still working. So we can come in here and we can go to /chat, and if we execute that, now you can see that we're displaying that one chat that's in our admin here, this one here, and you can see it's got the ID of 1 and the participants of 1 and 2. But now what we want to do is we want to filter this request of the chat list to be unique to whoever is querying it. So in our case, when we query it from the front end, we're going to send our username, and based on the username, we'll filter the chats according to that and return the chats that that username has on their profile, on their contact. So to handle filtering, we're going to go back to the views here, and we can close those two. We're going to work here in the chat list view, and what we're doing is we're creating this query set, which is saying chat.objects.all. So that's what it's going to return as the query set of objects by default. So we can actually just cut that, and we specify a specific method on these views, which is the query set. So we just say define get, and now you can see all these prompted methods. One of them is get query set, which takes in self, and we'll specify the query set as chat.objects.all. Then all we would have to do is just say return the query set. But now what we want to do is, based on the query, there's a couple of ways that we can do this, but the one way I'm going to do it is with a question mark. So we say question mark, username being the query parameter, equal to, let's say for example your username is admin. So to handle that kind of query, all we do is say the username equals to self.request.queryParameters.get, and then this is the name of the query parameter, which in our case is username, or it's none. So now we just check if the username is not none, then we'll continue. And what we want to do is grab the user's contact and then get the chats from that contact. So what I'm going to do is define a little helper method here, and we'll say define get user contact, which takes in a username, and we're going to need two things here. We're going to need from Django.shortcuts import getObject0404, as well as the contrib.auth import getUserModel, so that we can specify our user. So right here we'll say user equals to getUserModel, and then here we can just say define get or user equals getObject0404 of the user model, and then the query or the field to filter will be the username, where the username equals to the username being passed in here. So that'll give us our user. Then we just get the contact by also using getObject0404 of the contact, which we'll need to import. So there it is. And the filter will be user equals to user, because we can filter the contact based on the user field. So we get the user, then we get the contact, and now we just need to return that contact. So return contact, just like that. And now we can say that the contact equals to get user contact of the username. And to get their chats, we just say the query set equals to contact.chats.all. And the reason why we can say .chats is because on the model, if we come down here to chat, we specify the participants with a related name of chats. So by doing that, you're going to get a list of chat objects by referencing the chat's related name on the contact. And that's because the contact is the model that we're referencing in the many-to-many field. So basically, if the username is passed in as a query, get their query set and return that query set. And so if we were to check this out, then let's add a question mark and say username equals admin. And now you can see that it works. If I change the username to Matt, which is also a participant, then you can see he's there as well. So that is working. Let's now go into the front end. So I'm going to close the views and the models, and we'll go into the front end folder, to the source, and we're going to go into the side panel. And the reason why we're going into the side panel is so that we can specify when the component receives props, and in this case the props will be what it has access to, so loading and is authenticated. We'll also want to add the token here, so we'll say state.token, and we'll say username, which is state.username. So we just add those to the props, and then we can come back up top here and we'll say component will receive props. So when those new props arrive, we want to check if the new props has a token which is not null, and we want to check if the new props username is not equal to null. Then we basically want to fetch the chats of the user based on their username. We'll just define this method right here. We'll say get user chats equals to a method that takes in a token and a username. And what we do is we need to use Axios. So we'll come up top here and import Axios from Axios. And then here we would just say axios.get, and we specify the URL. So this will be HTTP 127 on our local host. And this goes to the chat URL, and we specify /, then our username, which equals to something that we will output dynamically, which is the username coming in here. And we can then say with the response, we can say console.log the response.data just to see what that looks like. And we'll set the state of chats to be the response.data that's coming through. And we'll just have to come into the state here and initialize that as an empty list of chats, just like that. But we're going to need to authenticate that request as well. So I'm going to say the defaults.headers equals to this object. We're going to specify the content type, which is going to be application/JSON. And then we specify the authorization, and this is for the Django REST auth. Then we output token, and then the token that's being passed through, just like that. So that's how we authenticate the request. And now if the new props token and the username are not null, then we can just say this dot get user chats, and we're going to pass in the token, so new props.token, and then just paste the username in there as the second parameter. So now if we check the server, let's come in here to the localhost and we'll refresh this. And so let's log in. So we'll say admin with the password there and click authenticate. And now you see side panel line 31 that we get some data here, ID1, participants, and messages. So that data is coming through there. Now all we want to do is output the chats that's coming in the state there as our contacts. So if we scroll down here, these contact items here, we're just going to comment those out, and we'll actually just bring one like that. It will come up to the top of the render method here, and we'll say the active chats equals to this dot state dot chats, and then we'll map for each chat. We will return a contact object just like this, and we'll specify the key on it, because whenever you output a list you have to specify the key, and the key is just going to be the ID of the chat that's coming through. And the URL I'm also going to specify like that, so we'll just output this dynamically and pass in the strings, and this will also be c.id, remembering the slash there as well because that's what it navigates to. And I'm not going to worry too much about the name, the picture URL, and status and all that, so we can just keep that like that. Then I'm going to take the active chats and we'll come down here and we'll just output active chats in the unordered list. So now if we come back here and refresh the page, there we go. So now you can see only one chat is showing there, and if I click it, it navigated us to /1. Now it's saying that the connection is made and that the WebSocket is open, which it is. If we check the server, it's connected to that chat test URL, but obviously there's no messages coming through because the database is fresh, and so that's why we aren't seeing anything here yet. And so in the next video we'll get started with connecting to these chats. If you enjoyed this video, let us know what you thought in the comments down below. Let us know how you're enjoying the series and if there's anything that you want to see added on. But otherwise, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.